welcome to the Elseworlds Exchange. I'm Sal, and I'm joined today by Josh Williamson. Josh, welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. I always love coming out here and just talking about comic books and just shoot the shit. It's a nice break in the middle of the day when everything is crazy all the time in comics. To just come in and just talk about comic books some more, but in a fun way.
Yes, exactly. We're not commentating on comic books. We're not talking about doom and gloom or storm clouds coming over the horizon. Instead, we're just going to celebrate the world of comics. Maybe talk some about what you're doing specifically on comic books and all that stuff. It's gonna be a fun old classic conversation. It's gonna be a blast.
Yeah, it's like I'm always I feel like I'm always a worst case scenario person all the time. Like I was just talking to somebody else about this earlier. We were looking at something and they were mad about something in a comic we were working on, and they were like, "Oh, they're mad about it," and I was like, "This is good. What are you talking about?" And it's because I can be so like worst case scenario about everything that when it's not the bottom, I'm always like, "Hey, this is still a win." All right, like. I remember, I don't know who said this. It might have been Daphne at Boom. She's an editor at Boom. I think she was the first person I saw say this on Twitter. I might be wrong, but she was like, every single comic book that comes out is a miracle.
Right.
Because the amount of work, amount of people, the stuff, the crazy hiccups and hurdles that show up out of nowhere. Every day there's something. You're just like, oh my God, like, how are we doing, to produce. It's interesting when you think about like an artist, right? Like, an artist could spend a month on one piece of art, right? Like one piece of art. But comic book artists, they are having to produce 20 to 22 pieces of art every month.
Yeah.
Right. Every month. And for writers, like working on, I feel like I definitely went through the gauntlet over the last few years. I mean, doing Flash, where a Flash was due every 2 weeks, no matter what, for like five and a half years. And now with how busy I am, it's like a script's due every week. And so, like the fact that we do that every week, it's so interesting. If you talk to people in other media, right? If you talk to people from TV and they're like, oh man, I gotta write 8 issues this, or 8 episodes this year, or something like that.
This year. Oh.
When you start to tell people from like TV, animation, film, what comic book creators do, their brains are just like, you know. I'm always jealous of, you hear these stories where like the director will finish a movie and then they'll be like, I'm going to spend the next year thinking about my next movie. I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had that. I wish I could like finish a comic and have a day to think about the next one. Usually it's like, oh, that's it. Next, like it's so immediate into the next thing. And it's like, because it's like, yeah, like I have my DC work, I have creator own stuff I've been working on, I have other things that I do, and then I'm also involved in other projects with DC that I'm not even writing, and it's like I'm always talking to other writers, editors about everything.
Yeah.
That there's never a moment to be like, I don't know, it's that feeling of like taking a deep, long like breath is so nuts. Like I'm always jealous of Hickman, how when Hickman left Marvel after Secret Wars, and was basically like kind of gone for about 3 years. Right?
It just disappeared. Right.
Ish. Like he was doing stuff and he was still doing creator own, and he was working on other things, but he wasn't in the grind for a few years. And then obviously he comes back really big with all the X-Men stuff, and now he's on his way out again. But it's like, it's like the ability to do that, I am so jealous of. Like even right now with Scott, where it's like Scott was able to finish Death Metal and then take time off and then just do Best Jacket. I'm so used to calling it Scottober now. I forgot it was called Best Jacket, not Scottober. And so because of that, like, but those things, and it's funny talking to Scott now, and Scott's like the happiest I've ever heard him now.
Sure.
Like now he's just like super happy all the time, and he's just like, oh man, this is amazing, this is great. It's like, oh, what's the difference? And it's like, oh, I'm not working on a million things at once.
That's like, it, right? Like I'm not building I'm not building the biggest goddamn thing at DC Comics and then have everybody get mad at me. Like I'm just making stuff that I want, that like only is about like it's from your headspace. And that's like, there's nothing like it. I know that like if you ask any working creator today, like, would you write for X character? Doesn't matter which one, or one thing you've created. They go to the thing they created every time because it's just like that's mine. That's something that like I created. That's from my blood, and I'm putting it out into the world.
Well, it's weird when you're a creator to think about this. Is something I think about a lot lately, where it's like, to not only, if you create something really big for someone else, to not only not control it later, but have that thing or have it taken away from you is have it to disappear.
Yeah.
Like, the people who worked on, I was a really big fan of CrossGen, right? Like I was like all in on CrossGen, and I bought all those books. I was working at a store. I was on their message boards. Like I was a CrossGen fan, right?
Yeah.
And like Scion was my favorite of those books, and they made a lot of really great books. And then it's all gone.
Yeah.
And it's like when you think about creators and even things like royalties, right? So like when you work at DC, particular DC or Image, right? Like, but really, I'll use DC as the example. When you work at DC, there's that those things are going to kind of have a longer life, right? Like,
Right.
DC's really good about reprinting things. They're really good about putting stuff back out there. They make it so everything kind of has a longer tail,
Totally.
right? And you like, it's funny because I keep track of for my own stuff, but I look at what DC reprints all the time, right? And they'll be like, we're gonna make an omnibus of this thing, like right now they're doing 5-year later, they're doing 5-year Legion stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like they're making those giant omnibuses. That stuff's 30 plus years old.
Yeah.
And it's like, but now it gets to come out again, and you get to discover it, and you get to kind of. But there's also, from a creator standpoint, it's nice that you're obviously going to get those royalties on it, but it's just nice to know that like this work you did continues to be put out there.
Seriously.
That fear of knowing you might put so much of yourself into this thing, like say CrossGen, and to know that like
it's gone.
It's gone, and not to say that like Disney and Marvel, they might one day say, hey, we're going to reprint an omnibus of every single one of these. I think at one point they did something like that, but it's like, could you imagine if they were just like, but there's no, I can't speak for them. I don't know for sure what the incentive is to do that at this point.
Exactly. I think you're right. I mean, like I'll say it just to keep you out of the fire, but like I don't think there's any incentive for them to reprint old CrossGen. And like as far as like them as a brand, they're like, what is that? The fan base is aging. Like what's the benefit? Is there a movie? Is there a? I mean, yeah, there's really no benefit. I mean, and I from word around the campfire is that like Marvel doesn't like to have things reprinted more, and so as a result, like things kind of fall by the wayside or fall out of public consciousness, which is like the death knell of any classic story.
Yeah,
You're
I
like,
don't even know if I'm gonna look right now. I don't even know if CrossGen is on. CrossGen isn't on the app, right? They don't put it on.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it too. But it's like they put all the Star Wars stuff on there, and I think some of the
sure.
But it's like, yeah, obviously, I understand the difference between CrossGen and Star Wars. But
no, but yeah, but they don't necessarily want they don't want to celebrate like, look at what this other publisher did with an IP we own. Like they also all the Alien stuff and
yeah. But they also own like Ultraverse. They own Ultraverse and
hey, Topaz ended up in that Thor movie. By name only, I think, and color scheme.
That's
maybe.
Funny. Yeah, they don't like. I don't know what I can't speak to them obviously, so I have no idea. Like, it's just speculating of like, is there an incentive to ever do anything with that? I have no idea why they don't do anything. I know people ask sometimes, they just don't. Like they just don't. Either they don't give a real answer, or
that's one of those things.
The truth is, we don't need a real answer. Like, it isn't our business to know the answer in a lot of ways, right?
No. But there's that's that thing where it's like, it's money on the table. I feel like any opportunity to take something old, polish it, put it out there, even for the nostalgia market, is just money on the table you're leaving there, right?
That's tough, man. It's tough.
Because I had this conversation with Tom King probably a year ago, where I was like, why don't they do any more Marvel like, why don't they reprint the Marvel DC crossovers? Because like it's just it's just sitting there, and I'm sure, at least with JLA Avengers, that thing has a contract about who gets what and how much, right? And it's like, I'm sure that no one is not getting money out of this thing that exists that you can just reprint. And it's the same with Malibu. It's the same with CrossGen. It's the same with like old Wildstorm books. Like, just get it out there. what about remember that reboot for Wildstorm, or Wildcats with the Jim Lee cover?
Yeah.
Where's that?
I don't know. Like, I mean,
Right?
that's the stuff it is. It's like, well, I don't know. I think DC's better about reprinting
DC is better
stuff.
about it. Yeah. Well, hey,
DC's better
that
about reprinting stuff.
that was in the Wildstorm hardcover that they put out a couple of years
Yeah,
ago.
I have that right here. Yeah.
Oh, what a beautiful edition, by the way.
It was great. Yeah, Ben Abernathy, who's now the back group editor, he put that together. Did a really cool job. It was cool watching that come together. Like Marvel, so I get a lot of Marvel omnibuses. Like, it's interesting. Like, and they sometimes goes out of print. They let things go out of print more often, and then they'll put things in these giant omnibuses. But like, it's interesting to see what will disappear and then what will come back. I mean, obviously it's calculated to do. There's a lot of there's a lot of math there we don't necessarily recognize.
I assume, but at the same time, like, I feel like some of the math doesn't add up. I feel like it's just kind of like, it seems almost arbitrary.
I don't know. Like, I mean, there's no,
right?
Like, I can't, it's one of those things where, how to explain this? Like, we see it that way, right?
Sure.
But I'm sure if we sat down and we said why, this has been my experience, that every time, I would say not every time, but most times I've sat down with people from the multitude of publishers that I've worked for, right? Like, I think I've worked for everybody at this point except for Dynamite, right? So, or at least in terms of like the bigger ones, like I haven't worked for like, say, Vault or Black Mask, but I have friends who have, or I know people who work there, and I have these conversations. Yeah. Thankfully, most times if I sit down with somebody and I ask why, like ask all these why questions, for the most part, they have an answer. And those answers are so dependent on like whatever is going on with the company at that time. Right. But they do have answers, and then it becomes a much, and then it's like, well, who am I then to tell you how to run your company? Like, this is something I struggle with sometimes.
Sure.
My friends remind me of this. Rosenberg was giving me a hard time about it earlier this week, or last week, I think on like Thursday. It is not my job to run the company, and or comics, and so I have to sometimes go, you're right, okay.
Right. Okay. That's your arena. Like, I'll write the book. I
know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. I'll get back to my job and let everyone else do their jobs.
Exactly.
And so it's and I get surprised sometimes. Like, there are times where, I'll sit down with somebody, I'll start asking questions, and I'll get worked up too and be like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And then they'll break it down for me, and I'm like, okay, well, that all makes sense. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I was wrong. All right, back to work. Like, it does happen. It does happen. I've had times with them where they break it down, and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize all those other parts, right? Yeah. And because comics is a really giant machine, and you don't see every cog all the time.
That's true.
Sometimes you start to question certain things, then you find out,
this affects this, this affects this. Like, it's a Rube Goldberg machine. Yeah. Like, if you pull one thread, the whole damn thing will come apart.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's funny because sometimes I'll see commentary about comics online, and it's fascinating to me sometimes how, who we talked about before, like, I don't pay attention to social media the way most people do. Like, a lot of times if something's like going on social media, the way I found out about it is people sending me screen grabs of things.
Right.
Like, I don't actually see it when it's happening,
No,
like,
you see it like after the fact. Yeah.
After the fact, where someone is like, oh, did you see all this? And I'll get all these like screen grabs, and I'm like, no, I'm not paying attention. But
no,
when I do, like, occasionally, I'm too busy. Like, I have too much stuff going on. I have it blocked most days, so
yeah.
It's a bummer because as soon as I want to engage, but then I'm just like, I don't have time. I don't have time to, because that like answering questions leads to more questions. Exactly. So it's like, it's tough sometimes. I have to be strategic, and I have to like really in the mood. It's like literally the most times I ever answer any questions on Twitter is it's 7:30 at night. I have both of the kids are down.
Right.
Like, I got them down on time. Right. Like, everything is cool. I come in my office and I look for like a minute or two, and I go, okay, in this half-hour block, because at 8:00 I'm like, I'm done. I'm gonna go hang out with my wife for the rest of the night, right?
Totally.
Like, so I have that small window. If that happens, then sometimes I answer things. But yeah, like, I will occasionally see commentary, or I'll talk to somebody. Like, I'll talk to somebody, and they'll start explaining to me, like, well, why aren't you doing this? Why are we doing that? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, don't you know about all this stuff of like why those things don't happen? or those things have been done, you know.
Right.
It's like every once in a while, and I hope I don't shame anybody what I say I'm about to say. Every once in a while, somebody will be like, you know what we should really try, what comics really needs to do is motion comics. That's the thing. And I'm always like, yo, that has been done.
You want
Like,
this? You want the DVD of them that I could
yeah,
buy?
oh,
Like, yeah.
we can go deep on all the motion comic
I
stuff.
think
It's
they're on
been done. Like, it's
Netflix. You
not
can
like,
watch like Spider-Woman #1. It's like,
yeah.
yeah. No, I
So it's
remember
like
that. I
that kind
remember
of
that
thing
was
where
a
you're like,
big thing. Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah. So that's the kind of stuff you're always like, oh, okay. Like, so you have to recognize like not everybody like that's the thing I try to appreciate sometimes is that like I've been doing this. Like I started working in comics. We've talked about before. Like I mean, my first job was working at a comic book store when I was 14 years
Yeah.
old, and so and even before that, I was going to conventions and reading stuff. And I had Wizard. Like I would read stuff. I was like, and then once I got my hands, like once I went to college and I met people who worked in comics, I was just always asking questions and
Yeah.
always like trying to learn. So not everyone has that kind of background, right? Like
No.
not everyone has been in and out. Like not everyone was like I had a call with somebody at DC Sales recently. We were talking about stuff for next year and just some Batman stuff, and we had never talked before. And I found out through the conversation that we'd like almost bumped into each other a couple times throughout our lives because of the weird like how comics can be, right?
Yes.
And it was like, oh, the comic book store he was a manager of, I almost worked at.
Oh.
They offered me a job and I turned it down because of like a bunch of different reasons back. But that was 20 years ago now, right? And so
Right.
you're like, oh, okay, that's weird. Um, but then it's like I sometimes surprise them when I'm like, I can have a conversation about diamond ordering systems. I can talk
Right.
about what the FOC actually looks like when retailers are doing it. Like it's not an abstract thing to me. I actually have the experience with it. So I know a lot of people don't always have that. And so it's interesting when I look at a lot of stuff or I see things and you're just like, I try to appreciate the fact that not everyone has seen all the ins and outs the way that we do, right? Like I have to recognize that like but there's also the flip side of that. Like I'm so embedded in the machine that I try to take a step back and be like, okay, what am I missing? Like how deep
Right.
into this am I that I'm not able to see the big picture? And that's why I try to talk to also newer creators a lot of times. Just get their take on things. Just
Yeah.
ask questions of like, what do you think is happening? Like, what do you see from your perspective? And it is interesting to kind of look at that aspect of stuff at the same time as trying to actually write comic books, like
Yeah,
trying
and do
to
your job. Like it's not
do
just
my job.
being
Yeah.
like an ambassador to the industry because like I not a day goes by, at least for the past year, probably 10, that I haven't gone on Reddit and seen at r/comic books a new thread that says, I just got in, where do I start?
Yeah. Where do I
And
start?
and so it's not just the people who like have assumed what the comic book industry has been for the last 45 years. It's also people who are like, I don't even know that there really is like a comic book industry. Like for me, I'm just like, I want to start reading Batman. Where do I start?
Yeah.
It can't
Well,
even
that's tough.
and like and why can't there be and they ask questions that are like so abstract and so out off the norm. It's where my show came from people
Hmm.
outside the industry being like, why? Like, why are they doing this? Why is
Yeah.
it like this?
Yeah.
And being like, holy crap! Like I've taken this for granted so much, and it's
Hmm.
like, and now, you know, the commentary industry has become its own cottage industry to the
It's its
point
own
where like,
thing. Yeah.
well, its own thing. You have personalities. I'm sure I'm guilty of it myself of throwing out just bullshit like
Hmm.
assumptions or blanket statements about how things work that influence the culture that consumes it and doesn't ask questions, but maybe asks questions that are tangentially connected to someone else just saying something. And then it
Yeah.
makes them think and it just that is what it is now. And then having people in the industry go like, hey, I can't tell you how my business operates, but I can also tell you that it don't operate like that,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
I mean, but then it's like I'm obsessed with this lately, and I've been talking to the creators about it. I have a plan that eventually I'm going to do something. You and I can talk about this later.
Sure.
Um, but I think I'm obsessed with what matters. Like what matters, what is
Oh, yeah.
success in comics, but what matters, right? Because it's
Right.
like you can have things that everybody loves, everything pops like everything's working, the team, the reviews, the commentary, everything is working, and everybody's like, this is awesome, this is a
Yeah.
success, right?
Right.
And then the sales come in and it's a total bomb, and you're like, what happened?
Right.
And that happens, so you're just like, okay, where's the breakdown here, and it's like what you're saying, it's like the commentary stuff and creators and all of us, like, sometimes there are things that you're like, well, that's not going to work, and then
Yeah.
it's a huge hit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like movies and TV shows,
Oh,
there's always
totally.
surprises and things, and you're just like, well, I thought that was really popular, like, what happened,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, at the end of the day, people got to get paid. So if the money's
Exactly.
not there, right? And then it's like sometimes there are things that are really, really popular. Or I'm sorry, I should change this. There are things that sell incredibly well that no one talks about or no
Yeah.
one likes,
Likes.
that then provides the money for these smaller projects that everyone loves. But I'm like, but
Right.
think if everyone loves these smaller projects, why are they not
Just
selling up
pushed,
here?
like,
So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it becomes it's such an interesting thing of like what matters, and it's like every once in a while, my wife has friends who read comic books, and every once in a while, I'll just be around them, and they'll ask questions, or I'll ask them questions, and I'm like, oh man, all this stuff that I think matters do not matter. Like all this stuff, they're like, they're just like, I go to my comic book store, pick my books up, I have no idea what's happening. Like
Right.
what's happening, but that's what's interesting is that like they don't know what's happening in the industry, but they know what's happening in their books,
Yes.
right? Like they're following their book, they're following their story. They know a little bit here and there, like, but they're oblivious to so much of it that we
Oh,
become
totally.
so obsessed with, and we're just like, well, these are all pieces that matter. And then you're just like, but do they matter? And so
Well,
I've been talking to other creators, like, I was talking to Rom V about this, and Tom King and Tom Taylor and Scott and James, obviously, and it's like all of us, and with the way our industry is undergoing changes right now, right? Like it's definitely changing and it's evolving, and there's little pieces here and there, and it's really fascinating to kind of see what's going on. Um, at the end of the day, people just still want to buy books. We've seen that, like they
yeah.
just want to buy books and be entertained. Like I think
Yeah.
those are the pieces of it, right? So it's
Yep.
like, or they want to feel something. I shouldn't just say entertained. They want to feel something, which I'm the same way. Like I was watching Squid Game, and I loved it, and it was incredibly stressful for me. That was my main feeling of that show, was stress.
Yeah.
So I think that like people just want to feel something from their
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I
So it's
could
like,
not I couldn't watch Squid Game. My wife got me into Midnight Mass, and I felt so much. I was like, I'm
yeah.
gonna watch Seinfeld for the next month.
Dude, I couldn't finish Midnight Mass. I got
Oh,
halfway
really?
through, and then I switched to Squid Game. Well, actually, this is the whole thing. I went from what was the first thing I watched? I'm trying to remember what the first one I watched was. I'm like blanking. It wasn't.
Oh, was it the
I was like,
Haunting of Bly Manor?
well, I was watching that one too. No, there was another one I watched, and I watched all of it. I binged it, and I'm blanking on what it was. I really liked it, and then I was like, well, I gotta find something else to watch, and so then I watched Sex Education
Ah,
and got like crazy hooked on that. But binged that. I don't ever binge anything, but I've been binging stuff lately. Like I think the last 3 or 4 months have been the first when I started binging stuff again. And by binging, I don't mean like, well, I was like, I watched two tonight.
yes.
That's like my. But I watched them. I watched them within the space of like a week and a half or 2 weeks, like that. Like it
Oh,
took me about 2
wow.
weeks. Good game. That's like I did it.
Yeah.
I watched 2 episodes tonight. Like that was my version of binging now.
Yep.
But I watched Education, and then I jumped into Midnight Mass, and then I left Midnight Mass for Squid
Squid
Game,
Game.
just because everyone kept talking about it to me, like you're gonna love it, you're gonna love it, you gotta watch it. So I started watching it, which I did love it.
Yeah.
But all those things I found, like Midnight Mass, I found incredibly stressful.
Oh, yeah.
Like I was deeply engaged in the story. I also felt like I was figuring stuff out a little too early in a lot of ways. Like I think,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
without getting too much spoilers, it's like, yo, way too many of these actors are wearing old people makeup. What's going on? Like
Yes.
in the first
Yeah.
episode, you're just like, all these people are wearing old. I know that actress ain't that old. Like,
Yep,
what's
totally.
happening? Like, so immediately I was like, oh, okay, I know what's going on, right? So,
Mhm.
like, some of that stuff I was already like, okay, but I still was really, I was enjoying it. Like, there was shots in it that I was like, oh, I want to screen grab of that because that shot's so cool, and
Yeah.
but I had a really hard time, um, uh, keeping up with it. because I was getting so stressed out. But yeah, the comics, you just want the same thing. You want people to feel something for that story. Like I know at this point, I know who Mike Flanagan is at this point, right? But I mostly know who Mike Flanagan is because of James.
Oh yeah,
It's like so it's like because of that stuff. Most of the shows, I had this moment. I don't remember what show it was I watched. We talked to you talk to Hollywood people, and there's other stuff going on, but like I was thinking about the Scream TV show that was on MTV years ago.
Yeah.
On that show, they would mention Nailbiter every once in a while. They would like literally show up copies of Nailbiter.
No
and I was
shit.
like, those people obviously somebody worked on the show was a fan of Nailbiter, either a writer or somebody, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder if any of them are on Twitter. Nope.
Really?
No.
Damn.
None of them are on Twitter. So I was like, oh, it's so interesting. Like our dynamics are so different. It's us like comic people versus like TV people. But I was like, there's a lot of shows that I love. I have no idea who makes them. Right. Or now I'm like, because of my thoughts on this lately, I've been a little more like, oh, okay. I really enjoy Sex Education. What else has this person done?
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this is the first thing they've ever done. That's fascinating. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to follow them because whatever they do next, I would also like to follow it. But it's so small. Like,
right.
Whereas then with comics, I feel like there are some people who follow the characters, and then there are some people who follow the creators, and a mix and match. Like I think I kind of mix and match a little bit,
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to kind of see all those dynamics at work. It's just like I said, it's like this Rube Goldberg machine. It's just this giant thing that is comics, and sometimes we're so embedded in it that we get kind of lost in all that, and then you kind of go. You talk to one person on the outside, and they're just like, one of my neighbors one time. We were outside talking, and her and her son and her husband. I don't know what was going on, but we were all outside, and she was like, "I saw Black Panther and I loved it." And I was like, "That's great, yeah, it's a good movie." And she's like, "I've never seen a comic movie in my life. I had no idea it was like this." It was a young person. It wasn't. This is like a younger person, not a like a person in their like mid to early 30s.
Yeah.
And they were like, I was like, no, like
You didn't see
Batman?
Batman?
Man, she was like, I might have seen a Batman once, maybe like a Batman. I might have watched like a bit of a Batman a long time ago or something. Like I might have, And I was like, so you don't have a memory of watching a Batman movie. Like you don't have a very clear. Like I can tell you stories about every time I saw a Batman movie in the theater. Like I can tell you my like some kind of anecdotal thing about almost every Batman movie ever.
Totally.
I remember being the first person in line for Batman Begins to go into the theater, and then this dude tried to cut in line with us. He was so crazy. I was like, I don't care. Like, he ran the moment the red carpet, the red thing, whatever the rope fell. This dude literally ran into the theater, and I was like, what are you doing? Like, we have assigned. I don't think we had assigned seats yet, but it's like,
but like, there's an order here.
Yeah, but I remember being like, that's weird. Anyway, but like, I can tell you a story about almost every experience Batman movies or comic movies, all that stuff. And I understand that's like very different for who I am, but when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, oh, that's right. Like this stuff is not as big. Like we take this stuff life or death sometimes, and not
totally.
Anyway, yeah. But speaking of that, like I am busy all the time, like all the time. It's like because I have to remember this sometimes. I wrote it down. I made like a list of every book I was working on just for DC this morning, just to kind of keep it all straight. And I was like, oh man, I'm doing too much. But it was like, with Batman, there's Justice League, because Batman and then Infinite Frontier became Justice League Incarnate.
Yes.
And then there's Robin, there's Deathstroke, and then I have the event stuff next year. And then I have like other books that haven't been announced yet that I've done. So it's a lot. Like, I mean, at some point, I recognize like right now I have like on average 4 books a month with DC on average. Coming out, but there's all this stuff behind the scenes that I work on, and it's like, I'm working on 2 really big stories for next year that are really massive. So it's like that stuff on top of everything else. Like I have a co-writer with Justice League Incarnate.
Yeah.
But co-writing doesn't mean, especially the way I co-write, like I don't co-write like I'm gonna write 10 pages, you write 10 pages, and let's see what happens. It's like
you're collaborating.
It's very much like, yeah, it's a very collaborative environment, and it's it's one of my close friends, and so it's a lot of phone calls, and we talk and pass scripts back and forth and stuff. And past, page breaks to scripts to the whole process.
Yeah.
It definitely helps at times to have like another person looking at stuff as the machine's running, but it's still a lot of work, and
Oh, sure.
and then doing but then on top of that, like doing Batman at the same time. It's like working on Batman, which was one that, I couldn't say no to, even though I did say no at first.
Did you?
I did, yeah. I said no the first time it came around. Well, it's funny, like I had talked to DC about doing Batman a few times over the last few years, and the timing was never right. Like when Tom left Batman before James came on, James knows this. I'm not like telling you something James doesn't know.
Sure.
I had a conversation with DC back in 2019 about me doing Batman after Tom, and we had this like whole conversation about it. And then when it came time, it was like, well, I have to finish Flash, and Flash is a double ship.
Yeah.
Like this is a story I've been telling, and I want to finish the story, and then it was like, okay, and these things, and it, and then like it went to James, and so all this, so when James was leaving, like James and I were talking about it, and I kept talking to DC about it. And originally I said no, and then but I kept talking to them about it every day.
Yeah.
So it's like, then it was like, okay, well, what would I do? And it was like, well, what do you guys want to do? What do I want to do? And then we started talking about what it could be. And then a big piece was like, I didn't want to derail what James was doing, but also what the back group was doing, right? Like the
Yeah.
back group, like the line of titles is really cohesive right now. Like everybody's working really well together. And, I was doing stuff with Robin and the stuff with Deathstroke. And it's like, Mariko has Detective and Tom's doing Nightwing, and, Batman Urban Legends was working, and there were plans for Batgirls in the works,
Yeah.
for the last year. And it's like, I know I'm forgetting a book, but it's like they had a machine that was running, and they had plans and creators they were talking to. And it was like, okay, well, I don't want to come in and blow it up.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to be that creator that comes in and is like, well, now it's my time and my story, and
Exactly. And everybody
throw all
fall
the
in line because
toys
it's the Bat title. So
off the
yeah.
table. So it worked
Yeah.
out because James had already intended for Batman to leave Gotham. That was already in the works. And so I was like, I'll just do that then. Like, let's
Yeah.
just keep that. Let's just keep that happening. And so that helped out a lot. And then it was just a matter of just trying to have some fun with Batman for a while, and just try to tell some cool stories of Batman, and just kind of we got to have Jorge Molina work on it. And the stuff that we're doing in these first 4 issues of Batman is this storyline called Abyss, about a new villain named Abyss. Surprise. But
Yep.
we're doing this new villain named Abyss, and then it's like the stuff from that will lead into a bigger story we're doing with Batman. And then they'll start bringing together some of the pieces. Like everything I'm doing in the DCU since Infinite Frontier Zero has all been about, and we talked about this before, but it's like I'm just putting all these pieces out into the DCU, right?
Yeah.
Just like scattering all these characters out and all of these story pieces, and laying all the groundwork so that eventually it's all going to start colliding, and it'll start colliding in the spring. And so while I was working on Batman, I was like, okay, well, I need Batman and certain pieces of the back group to get into place for that as well. So let's
Okay.
pieces to do that, right? And so,
Yeah.
all these things are just, it's like I'm trying to make it so that the DC really feels connected, right? Like I want to make sure that all these different pieces are connected and kind of bounce off each other, right? Like there's stuff
Yeah.
from Robin that will impact the Deathstroke book, that will impact Robin back on Robin, and then there's things from those things that will impact Batman. But then I have the other side of it, the like Infinite Frontier side of it, the Justice League Incarnate side of it, and those things are starting to come together, where it's like, you know, I kind of want to compare it to like how Infinite Crisis was. Like the build to Infinite Crisis, they basically set up like there are 4 problems brewing in the DCU,
Right.
and those 4 problems are going to collide at some point. And that's essentially what I've been doing, where it's like there are all these problems in the DCU that are building, and then obviously I talk to other creators about what they're doing,
Sure.
try to find ways of integrating everything together. But it's like, yeah, everything is going to at some point just massively collide, and
That's great.
it'll be a big fun.
Well,
I'm
that's
really
and
curious. It's gonna be one of those things where I think it's gonna be shocking at first. I think there's gonna be parts of it that people are gonna be like, "What the fuck?" And then you'll start to see how it comes together after that. But there'll definitely be a big thing first that sets it off. That'll get people going. Like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Like, that's that's not what we expected, you know, and now
Right.
it's
Well,
gonna
that's
go from
certainly I think that's where Infinite Frontier went, and I wanted to ask you about,
yeah,
how
sure.
you feel now that Infinite Frontier, the series, has concluded,
Yeah.
and its impact on DC and where it's going. Because I know that, like, Infinite Frontier was, like, a springboard for the next thing, but, like,
Yeah.
now that it's concluded, how do you feel about how it went and how it was executed? And, because it's ending, I don't wanna spoil it, but I will say that, like, there's a kinda holy shit moment at the end, but it's
Mhm,
not
mhm.
the kinda holy shit moment where it's like, "We blew someone's brains out."
Yeah, I didn't wanna do that. I can save that for later. Don't get me wrong, people are gonna
Sure, yeah.
die, but I didn't wanna, like I
But
saw a
it's
page
yeah.
today where someone got shot in the head. No, but,
Mhm.
you know, there's definitely gonna be a, there's gonna be some conflict within the DCU. Like, there's
Right.
going to be, you know, villains are gonna do bad things.
Mhm.
Like, you know,
Yeah. But it also
that
doesn't
is going to
feel
happen.
yeah, but it also doesn't feel like it's housekeeping. This feels like it's coming from a perspective of story building and universe continuation as opposed to, like, there's been a lot of, like I think it's fair to say that when New 52 ended, people
Mhm.
still had a lot of questions about what happened, what mattered, what was going on,
Yeah,
and there was a lot of, like, build and work that went into it that either did or didn't stick, and
oh,
now
sure.
we're in a place, I think, of just kind of like, don't worry about that. Like,
Yeah, don't worry about it. Let me just
no,
tell a cool story. Let's just tell some cool
yes,
stories. Let me do
yes,
some.
because
Let me do some cool things with these characters, and don't let me. I'm not. I I have a note here on my desk somewhere. I forgot where I put it, but I'm not here at this point. Don't get me wrong. I do try to fix things. I'm not gonna lie,
sure,
uh, but that isn't my goal,
right,
right? Like, I'm not here to fix the timeline. I'm not here to reboot anything. I'm not here to, you know, I'm not trying to come in and like rewrite reality again. It's like that's
yeah,
not what I want to do at this point. At this point, I just want to tell stories about these characters.
yeah,
Right, like I think we have, you know, DC has a lot of really great characters. There's a lot of fascinating stuff, and there's things you can do, and you know, I want to just tell stories about those characters. And one of my favorite parts of the DCU is watching those characters interact with each other, right? Like,
yeah,
I like
yeah,
seeing Batman and Superman together, but then I also like seeing Batman interact with all of the DCU, right? Like, I
totally,
like seeing Batman bounce off of characters you don't normally get to see him in, you know? It's like, you know, I want to see these characters kind of interact with people that we don't normally see, right?
yeah,
Like, and without getting into spoilers, like, that's a big part of this stuff is like, I want to put some of these characters in different situations where they have to interact with other characters they might not normally interact with
yeah,
because you can get gold in that, you know, and sometimes you find character moments. I mean, go back, look back at Justice League when Keith Giffen was doing it, you know, with
yeah,
Jada Mathis and Kevin McGuire, and it's like the gold they discovered with Booster, you know, no pun intended, but Booster Gold and you know,
Blue
Blue
Beetle,
Beetle,
yeah,
like those organic kind of connections that you can find in the DCU. Those are the things that I love, and so it's like, I mean, on top of I love all the legacy stuff and the generational stuff, but those relationships between the characters, and it's
yeah,
like, you know, back group and with Fan family and the Flash family and the Green Lantern characters, but then you get to mix and mash them up and stuff, and get them to kind of that stuff. I really, really love to do, and so it's like that's a lot of what next year is, and it's like, you know, when I look at things like what's going on. Like we were saying before with Infinite Frontier, that was a part of the Frontier, which is getting to see some of these characters interact with each other and kind of. But also, I'm really interested in seeing stories in the DCU from perspectives we don't normally see them from. So it's
mm,
like doing an event like Infinite Frontier, those 6 issue series, doing it from like Roy's perspective and Alan and Todd and Jade's, and then getting to see it from you know, Bones and Chase's perspective, like just these different, you know, President Superman and you know, Flashpoint Batman, like getting to tell stories at that level, at that scale from those perspectives, it makes it something unique and different. And and so that's stuff I'm really interested in, where it's like, don't get me wrong, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman and the Justice League will have, you'll get to see their perspective, but I'm really interested in how, you know, when an event happens, a lot of times the event comes down to the big three's point of view, right?
yeah,
Like, you know, and I think Jeff has talked about this, where it's like Infinite Crisis is a Superman story at the end of the day,
right,
and so is Doomsday Clock, right? And those are great. Like, I love Superman, and I love Infinite Crisis. Uh, I think that it's good to see it from different perspectives at this point, and so that's the stuff that I'm really interested in. That's what I was trying to do with Infinite Frontier, and I think I was successful there. And I was able to tell a story that made sense, was clear, and I was able to tell this little piece of the DCU that is going to then blow up into other problems, right? Like, it was about getting Darkseid where I needed Darkseid to be. It was about getting Barry and Pariah and getting, all of these parts without, sorry for spoilers, but, it's like, I wanted to get these characters in places I need them to be in an organic way. Like, I wanted everything to be earned, right? Like, there's one thing I'm working on now that, there's stuff that you'll see, like, when we get around to, it's funny because, like, there's stuff for the bigger stories we're doing next year where I'm like, well, this character is going to do this.
Yeah.
And the question then comes, like, is that earned? Does it make sense? Is that an actual natural progression of those character? And it's like, yes, because we're going to take the steps to get there, right? So it's
Right.
like, the things that are going on in all the books I'm working on, some of the stuff is just about, like, me showing you how to get there. So it's like, when we do some of the stories next year, there might be a character doing something, I don't want to say out of character, because nothing's out of
Unexpected.
character, but they might be taking an extreme point of view on something, right? You might have a character be like, I'm fed up, so I'm going to do this thing, right? Like, you look at Max Lord and how Max
Yeah.
Lord, when you get to that moment where he killed Blue Beetle, I think it was shocking, but it was earned. Like, if you go back and read Justice League, it's like, oh, the pieces are here.
Oh
Like, they
yeah.
didn't move this stuff, right? And it's like all this stuff kind of built to that moment of Countdown to Infinite Crisis. It didn't feel out of nowhere, right?
Right.
And you were like, okay, that makes sense. There's obviously a heel turn to that, right? Like, it was still a heel turn,
Yeah.
but you still were like, oh, okay, that does make sense to me. It wasn't
It's in
super random.
character. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, like, if it been, dude, if we got to the end of that and somehow the reveal was that, like, Ted Cord was the villain and he killed Max Lord and was like, I would be like, what the fuck? Like,
It wouldn't.
that
Yeah.
would have been very, surprising. And
I
then,
think that's
but then
actually a Tales from the Dark Multiverse story.
it is. I think it is. I think
That's
James
the
did that
Infinite
one.
Crisis one. Yeah.
It is one. Yeah, I think James did that one, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's right. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, that's if I want to make sure that everything feels organic and it feels like we built this story out, and we're not forcing stuff, because,
Right.
and that is the conversation I have with editorial sometimes. We'll talk about, like, well, this character is going to do this, like, they're going to do these things, and they'll be like, well, where was that earned at? Why did that character come to those conclusions? And it's like, you're
Yeah.
right. I got to do the work, and you got to
Yeah.
make sure we get there. And that's also part of the math in my head on all this stuff of, like, it's interesting, to kind of lay all these pieces on the table, knowing that a lot of them will not be in the same place next year. Like, I
Right.
know there are certain things, either we've introduced things or we've put characters to certain places or locations, knowing it was all strategically on purpose to get them someplace else later. And so it'll be, I think when it comes to some of the event stuff that we're talking about and some of the things that we've been putting together, it's, I, I hope that when we get there, that when people look at it, that they can be like, "Oh, clearly this
It
happened
was.
because of it."
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a build to this. It wasn't super random. And don't get me wrong, we were talking about before about some of that stuff. Some people will not care, and they will just be like, "Nope, this
Yeah.
sucks."
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But you can't worry about that. You just gotta tell your story and try to have fun with it. But yeah, between all the stuff, But yeah, Infinite Frontier, I am happy with it, and I am happy with the ending, and I knew that those are the pieces I was trying to get to, right? Like, I knew I needed for Darkseid to kind of step up and admit, like, oh, there might be something out there scarier than me, so I need to make moves. And he knows there is, right? So
Yeah.
he's like, I need to make moves, and that's a big part of what Justice League Incarnate is about. Is like, you have the Justice League Incarnate team looking for Barry, trying to stop Darkseid, at the same time as Darkseid being like, there might be something out there that I can't control. I need to find a way to control it, because
Yeah.
Darkseid is obsessed with control, right? Everything is about control.
Yeah.
Um, you go back to his history of the things that happened to him that made him and who he is. It's all about control. And so to have him have to admit to himself, I might not be able to control this thing, and that's scary. I need to figure out how to control it.
Yeah.
And how does that impact the DCU? Like, if the guy who's supposed to be your scariest person, right, your scariest villain, the real big bad of the DCU, if he's admitting there might be something worse, what happens next, and do you end up having a team with Darkseid at some point to do that,
Yeah.
or but with Darkseid, you can't trust Darkseid, so that's a whole other thing, right? So,
Yeah.
and you know that at the end of the day, like Darkseid's going to stab you in the back or what you do, so it causes all these really interesting conflicts with him, and I think the stuff we're doing in Justice League Incarnate, it's a story about those people, and it's a story about getting the multiverse where we need it in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But everyone has their arcs, like President Superman and Thomas and Avery all have arcs, and we have a new character called Dr. Multiverse, and she has an arc. But then, Darkseid has an arc of
Right.
what he has to go through, and then by the time we're done with Justice League Incarnate, then the shit really
Totally.
then
Good.
it's like, oh no, yeah, now this is bad, this is dangerous, we have a problem, and then what do you
Yeah.
do about that? What do you next? What do you next when you
Yeah.
realize the multiverse is like legit in danger? What do you do next? And so
Uh,
you have to play with
I
those ideas.
I like the execution of Justice League Incarnate because it takes the multiverse, which has more or less been like a passenger or a
Hmm.
bargaining chip in the DC
Yeah,
universe. It's either it's destroyed or it's back, and then you don't
yeah,
really see it executed in any kind of like meaningful way where it actually has impact outside of like, I guess the vampire Batman's still alive somewhere, or whatever. And in this,
yeah.
it's
Well,
like
I
no,
wanted to. Yeah, we get to go to all the different worlds, and we get to show that one of the things I've always been obsessed with, and this was in Infinite Frontier, is that like. And I only really, I think I talked about it more in Infinite Frontier, and we tried to, we did show it because Machine Head is very like,
yeah,
he's like, this is a mess. Like, I basically wanted, if you are the multiverse, you're every world in the multiverse, right?
yeah,
At some point, you're gonna look at Earth Zero, and you're gonna be like, all our problems start there, right?
yeah,
Like every major problem we've had, that has been a focal point of it. So what do we do about that? And
right,
that's what Machine Head was trying to figure out. Machine Head was like, what if I put a wall around it? Like,
yeah,
what if I find a way, and if I can make a deal, or can I make a deal with Darkseid and basically say to Darkseid, hey, listen, I will help you control Earth Zero if you leave the rest of us alone. And
right,
that was the bargain that all those characters made. And you have to question, like, are they wrong?
right,
Right? Was Machine Head wrong to say? And it's like, one of the things the Machine Head talks about is that like way back when Flashpoint happened, that idea that like, oh, there was I forget how they word it now. It's like, oh, it was like a rock or a bullet hitting a windshield, right? So
yeah,
it's like it splintered out across that windshield. But the thing that Machine Head says is like those cracks did not stop at Earth Zero. Those cracks spread out. You didn't see it, and one of those cracks hit Earth 8, and that caused them to have problems. And he's like, "But you guys didn't care about that.
right. Because we're all
Like,
variants to you. Like it's yeah,
yeah, they don't. They're not the originals, and that it leads to whole other kinds of conversations. And I think that like I touched on this a little bit about like after Death Metal. I mean, the people of the DCU, like how do you like how do I try to word this, like the existential terror,
oh
right, of
sure,
like oh, there's a multiverse and we just died again,
yeah,
like the world was destroyed and taken over by Batman Who Laughs, like when did that happen, like
yeah,
all of these pieces, like what does it do to normal people, and then like what does it do to heroes too, and like having
yeah,
to like like what does it do to them, and so I wanted to play with around those ideas, and the stuff with the multiverse. And then it's like now Justice Incarnate is having to try to track down, what happened to Barry, because they don't know where Barry is. They're trying to track down Barry, and they're trying to track down Darkseid and stop
yeah,
Darkseid from doing what he's doing. And they're going to these worlds, and they're not welcome on those worlds, right? Like go to Earth 8. Earth 8 is like, get out of here. Like Machine Head is dead because of you. And then you have them going to like or 13 and having characters there being like, you guys are bad, like your very presence here puts us in danger, like get
right,
out, like, so there's a lot of those kinds of things happening in the book, and then you're gonna see how that stuff, I just feel like I don't know how to, I'm gonna get into maybe too much of a real world analogy here possibly, but it's like you can only ignore things happening outside your shores for too long before they hit your shores, right?
oh totally, yeah,
Yeah. So that's, I mean, I think the fact that there isn't in the DCU, we have the totality team, right? Like they're paying attention to what's going on.
yeah,
but it's like, how is that not like a regular concern? You know, it's like
Yeah.
whatever's going out there. So that's what's like a big part of next year is going to be like, well, Earth Zero has its problems, and then there's problems in the multiverse. At some point, those things are going to collide, and then what do you do? Like, how do
Yeah.
you, you know, when you have these two fronts happening, this basically two attacks on two fronts, it's like, how does that impact the DCU? And then, you know, so there's gonna be some major pieces that the puzzle will, you know, explode at some point, and you'll see the ramifications of that. But all those things will get earned, I suppose.
Right.
That was Infinite Frontier, was me like putting out a lot of those ideas on the table, and then putting a lot of those like character pieces and kind of presenting these like smaller moments among the multiverse. I remember Greg Rucka one time said this thing where it was like, I can't remember who he was quoting, but it was like, the bigger the world, the smaller the story. And then it
Mm.
was the smaller the world, the bigger the story. You
Yeah.
know, like, you gotta flip them. And so I always think about that with some of this stuff, and the books that I'm working on, and try to keep, you know, that straight. So it's like with Infinite Frontier, it's like, yes, I'm telling this story that's big, cosmic scale, multiverse, all these big ideas, all these things. But then I just want to tell a story about Roy, and
Yeah.
Roy being like, I gotta get home to my daughter, and where's my daughter, right? Like, it's, you know, or these, or the idea that, like, you know, Obsidian and Alan, and, or I'm sorry, yeah, Alan, Obsidian, and Jade, how it's like, you know, they haven't really been around each other a long time now. They are, but they're still being splintered apart from each other, and the frustration that they have there of, you know, Obsidian being like, I understand my dad is going through these like life changing experiences, but he's also part of this bigger thing with the totality. But at the end of the day, Obsidian's like, I would really like to just hang out with my dad. You
Right.
know, it's like, and Jade feeling the same way, but then Jade also feeling like her brother and her dad kind of protect her when it's like, I don't need to be protected. So it's
Yeah.
like, those are the kinds of things that you have to kind of like, yes, there's gigantic backdrop, and then we boil it back down. Uh, do you ever go to the theater? You ever go
Oh yeah.
to the theater? And yeah, so I always think about this when I go to plays, right? And I'll go to musicals and stuff. And sometimes I'll go. I'm not gonna name any. I'll name a couple, but not my one's my bad mouth. I'm not gonna name.
Okay.
But I'll go see some huge production, like huge. You know, in those productions where it's like, oh man, they had a budget,
Uh-huh.
and you watch it, and you're just like, yeah, but then it's boring, or it doesn't click, or the performances, or the story, or whatever. And then and you're
Yeah.
just like, you know. But then I'll go and I'll see something like, even when I saw Hamilton. Hamilton has a very minimal set,
Yeah.
you know, and they keep it moving, and you're like, this is you they engross you into that story, where even though it's such a minimal set, you become very much involved and engaged with it, you know.
Right.
You know, there are times you'll go see these like smaller performances where it's like two people on a stage, and that's it. Two people,
Yeah.
two chairs. And they just like act the shit out of that stage, right? And
Yeah.
you feel where they are. Like, your brain fills in the blanks of this giant backdrop wherever they could be, and they could be anywhere sometimes. And
Right.
I think one of the best performances I ever saw was Patrick Stewart doing like a one man show of the Christmas Carol,
Ugh.
and he played
Awesome.
every part, and it was just a black stage, but he had all these props. Like, it was all props that were propped up, and he would
Okay.
take from it. He would take from it as he was performing, and then he would discard whatever piece. And I love the Christmas Carol. It's like one of
Yeah.
my like favorite stories, right? And watching him do that, you totally are like locked in. You buy it, and obviously Patrick Stewart's amazing. You're like really locked in, but
Yeah.
getting to see that live, I
That's dope.
sometimes I think about that with comics, where it's like, you can have these crazy backdrops, and you can have these crazy settings, and set pieces, and you should in a lot of ways. Like, if you can make an interesting set piece for you, for the artist, for the reader, you should do that. But at the end of the day, like, it still comes down to those characters,
Yes.
and you know, having, you know, I think like, I remember when I was working on Flash in the beginning, there's a scene early, and it's where Barry confronts August about being Godspeed. He like figured it out. He confronts him. They're in the middle of a. I wrote it like two samurais in a field, and I sent him all this
Ah.
reference to, like, you could Google two samurais in a field, you're gonna find a ton of dope art, right?
Yeah.
So I sent Carmine all of this art. It was like two samurais in a field. So just think of it like that visually, right? It's just two samurais in a field. So in that scene, it's Barry and August. They're in the middle of like a tall grass field, and it's
Yeah.
catching fire and stuff because of them, and it's And I wrote it, but I was like, to me, it's just these two characters having this confrontation for 3 or 4 pages, right? And it's
Yeah.
just this moment of back and forth. And I remember, but I had that in my mind where I'm like, it doesn't matter where they are. It's just these two characters, and they're gonna
Right.
bounce off each other, and they're mad at each other, and they're having an emotional moment. And I remember turning the script in and waiting to hear back. Like waiting to get the notes. Because I was like, this scene, I felt it, so I'm like waiting. And so when the notes came in, I was on a call. It was a call, and they had a few notes on this pages and a few on these pages, and I was like, I'll take care of those. And then I was like, oh no, like they didn't like those pages in the middle, and I'm like, what do you guys think of those pages? And they were like, those pages are awesome, good to go, like no change. Those are the best pages of the book. And I'm
Right.
like, oh great, like thank you
All
for telling me
right.
that. But it's like, because I think you have to kind of do that. You have to be able to boil it down to the character moments. I think when you look at Infinite Crisis, there's a lot of really big moments in Infinite Crisis, but the ones I think people remember the most are things like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman standing in the wreckage of the Watchtower talking,
Yes. Yep.
right? Like
Easily.
that scene resonates, and people remember that from that first issue. I think it's probably one of it's arguably the best scene of the whole book,
I'd
right?
say so. Yeah.
There's all kinds of great stuff in there.
There's great moments.
There's Superboy Prime. I think that some of that stuff with Superboy Prime and Superman, the Earth 2 Superman,
Oh
them
yeah.
arguing and stuff like later, some of that stuff is so emotional, and
Yeah.
I think that but that's it. Like you got to find ways to boil these things down. I've been
Right.
rereading Preacher, and there's a lot of scenes in Preacher that are like that. It's these quiet moments, these characters finally talk to each other about something, and those are the stuff that really stick with you. Or Starman, it's
Yeah.
like Starman. Just there's like those little moments. I remember like they would do those Talking with David issues, right? Like every year he would do an issue where it was just David and Jack talking in a graveyard or whatever
Right.
in
Yeah.
the past. Like they just had a whole issue on that, and that's the stuff you would look forward to those issues. And it's like you
Yeah.
like all the big stuff, and don't get me wrong, like everything I'm working on next year is very much like heroes versus villains. There's no hero versus hero kind of stuff. It's all
Yay.
very oh, it's very good guys versus bad guys. It's very good versus evil.
Yeah.
But it's like uh, it's. But I like to see those things kind of these quieter moments at the same
Right.
time as all the big stuff, right? And I that was again like Infinite Frontier was a lot of me trying to get that going, get
Yeah.
that ball going. And same thing with Batman. Like there's a scene in Batman 119 where Batman is talking to a character we haven't revealed. There's another character in the book. There's like another villain in the book we haven't revealed yet.
Oh.
And there's a scene where the two of them are just talking. And I know that sounds like, but it's a very tense conversation, and it has a really cool set piece. And there's things that are happening. Like it isn't just much talking heads. Like stuff is
Sure.
happening. But at the end of the day, it's like it's these two characters having a confrontation, and it was like my
Yeah.
favorite. It was one of the things that had the whole thing clicked for me when I wrote that scene. Right, like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I know what this book is about now because of this one moment, right? This one
Yeah.
conversation ballooned
Well,
out.
one of the most recognizable Batman books of all time is just a scene of Batman and his greatest villain interacting with each
No,
other
Joker.
without punching.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
those moments resonate. They resonate more than people give credit for, right? Because it's just Preacher is mostly just people talking to each other. Like the real
There's a lot of
drama.
punching, but there's a lot of talking.
But like
And
for the
there's
most
gross
part, like
stuff too.
there's a
Yeah,
whole issue dedicated, almost an entire issue dedicated to talking about how cool Bill Hicks was. Like there's a lot of
I
just
know.
talking.
That
Uh,
scene is actually much shorter than I thought it was. So I got past that
it felt
now.
long.
I thought it was like a long. I thought it was. I might be wrong because I'm not.
I think it might be 2 pages.
My memory
Yeah.
of Preacher is like is. I haven't done an actual reread of it in a while, so now I'm rereading it, and it's like it's actually much shorter than I remembered it being. Right,
Yeah.
like in my mind, I'm like there was more going on, but I haven't got to Salvation yet, and like I'm about to get to some. I'm like right on the tip of Salvation,
Yeah.
and I love Salvation. It's like it's one of my. I know a lot of people don't. It's funny, like talk to people that's like one of their least favorites, but
Yeah.
I love Salvation. It's crucial to the Preacher story. It's
Is
the
that the Otis
moment where
Kincannon one, or is that the
yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So the thing about Salvation is that's when he lives in Salvation. He's the sheriff
Yes.
and all that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
So
a pretty awesome arc. It's that
it is
breath
ours.
before the plunge.
Yes. Well, it's not just that. So in the hero's journey, um, there has to come a time where the hero is actually given what they want, And then they still have to make a decision: am I going to be the hero or not? Right? Like, because you're not just a hero because you want something, right? Like, true heroes do it because it's the right thing. And so for Jesse, we're getting into Preacher spoilers here. I apologize if it was the red Preacher, you should read it. But
it's a 35-year-old book.
If Jesse has a moment where, yes, he's lost Tulip and he's lost kind of the mission, right?
Yeah.
But he has this moment where he's in Salvation. He has the deputy who clearly has feelings for him. He gets to be with his mom.
Yeah.
You know, he gets to punch Nazis and KKK people in the face all day long,
which
and
is all
just
he
beat the
wants.
shit out of bad. That's all he wants to do anyway. Beat some crap people and be a cowboy.
Yeah.
Like, he wants to be a cowboy on the range person. Like, he wants to be John Wayne.
Yep.
He gets to have all of those things. And life could be perfect there. He knows this. Like, life could be good there. He could ignore the mission. He could ignore all the problems. He could literally just lead a good life. And he has to make the decision. Do I lead this good life, getting everything I want, or do I do the right thing? Do I complete the mission? Do I save people's lives? Do I do what I thought was the right thing to do? And of course he chooses, I'm going to do the right thing. Right. Yeah. And it's like, I think every hero has to go through that moment. You know, they have to go through that little piece of the puzzle to really get there. And that's what Salvation is to me. And that's why I think it's like crucial. You can't, because I remember years ago having a discussion with a couple other people, like editors and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, you just skip that one," and I'm like, "No, you don't skip it. It's so crucial to his character. You know, like it's the moment where he becomes the hero.
Yeah,
you know, because it's like when you have to be a hero, you have no choice to be a hero. That's very different from when you have to choose and you make the right decision. And so I always think about that when we work on these superheroes too. You know, it's I thought about that a lot with Barry and what Barry wanted to be a hero, what he thought was a hero, and you know, it coming down to it wasn't about his mom's death. Like, that's not why he chose to be a hero. He chose to be a hero because he knew it was the right thing to do. Like, and we knew that because previous to Rebirth, that was the case, right? Like, he was the Flash before his mom had died, and he was the Flash after. So that means it's not about that. And so Barry needed to also recognize that. You know, Barry also needed to see that it's not because of this tragedy in my life that made me a hero. I'm a hero because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's a part of what I was trying to get him to by the end of my Flash run, was for Barry to realize that, but me also to say that out to the world.
Right.
You know, that was part of what I was trying to do in the end. And this was with Batman and Robin and Deathstroke and the Infinite Frontier stuff and all the event stuff. It's like, it's the same thing. It's like, I really want to make sure that, I have something I want to say about not just any one character anymore.
Yeah.
I have something I want to say about the DCU as a whole, and about the legacy and generations of DC and the pieces of DC that I not just that I like, but I think are important to kind of put out there to people, you know, or at least acknowledge, because I think there's a lot of parts of DC that we all love that don't always get all the attention it deserves. And so I always want to try to put a spotlight on those pieces, and then also show those pieces from different points of view. So those are all the stuff that's in my head all the time. And I have a million whiteboards in my office. Like, I have a giant one here. I probably told you before, I have a giant one here, a giant one here, and I have one on the floor over here that I use. Like, stacks of notebooks and all just keeping it. And the lab is just locked up in here.
Oh, sure.
Trying to keep it all together. And then I have a bunch of documents that I write. They're like, it's funny, if anybody ever calls me, I was talking about this with DC, where I'm like, if you guys want to know anything, you start calling me up. I'll tell you probably too much. I'll ramble about it all and break it all down for you. Like, Tom Taylor and I were talking about some of it last night, and I was just breaking it down for him and giving him he and I already talked about it. That was part of the conversation, was like, nothing's changed. I wanted to make sure nothing had changed with some of the plans, because he and I work on, we work so close now. It's like he and I are doing so much at DC that it's good that we communicate and talk about what we're doing, and know, bounce some ideas around and talk everything through. And so I'm always trying to talk out as much as I can with him and other creators too. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, dude.
Oh yeah, no, you're
all the time.
Prolific. It's exciting.
I'm nervous right now. Like, while we were talking, I have it full screen on my laptop, but I know I can hear my email, right? So I can hear.
No, things are coming
email.
in. You're like,
I can. Yeah, I bet it's going. And then I heard I have different, because I use different forms of chat for different things.
Yep.
And I could hear those chat chimes, so I'm like, well, that means this person's asking me questions. What is that about? I can hear this person's asking me stuff. That's usually a problem. So I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be. It's funny how I can walk away from my computer for an hour or two and come back, and sometimes it's great. Sometimes like a bunch of art comes in, and you're just like, oh man, this is awesome, or lettering drafts come in, which I love to see, or roughs and covers and all this stuff comes in. You're like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then sometimes stuff comes in and it's like, oh, here's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely happens too. That's universal though. I think that's every job on the planet. You go away for a day, you come back. There's always like a healthy mix. It's always that meme, that gif of Donald Glover on Community walking in. It's like that meme feels so mass appeal, I guess is what I'll say.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a lot going on all the time, but yeah, man. And then creating on stuff is good. Like I'm working on a lot of Crayon stuff. I did an issue of Silver Coin. Have you guys read Silver Coin yet?
We have, yes, yes. It's a really awesome idea and a really great execution. I love the concept of like giving these different creators that opportunity to like tell this kind of like crazy story, and I think it's really successful.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Like Michael Walsh and I talked about it years ago.
Really?
And a long time ago. He was like, I have this idea of this thing. Would you want to do it? And I was like, yeah. And it finally came around to where I could actually do it. He and I just talked on the phone a few times, and I was like, oh, has anyone done an arcade yet? Has anyone put the coin into an arcade? And he was like, no, but that makes total sense. And I was like, dude, let's do an arcade in the early 90s. Let's just do just have fun in that time period. And it was funny because like I wrote the script. Well, he and I talked about it on the phone, and then I wrote the script, gave it to him, and I was pretty descriptive of what I thought it should be. But like, Michael and I are the same age, and so when the art came in, I was like, dude, this stuff looks like my childhood. Like it definitely looked like the arcade, it looked like the mall, all that stuff, the kids, everything. I was like, it felt so lived into, and then he just goes crazy with the horror, and he knows horror really, really well, and it was such a departure from everything else I'm working on. It's so, when you're doing, and this is the thing about creator own sometimes, is that like when you're telling these stories that are huge, and you're not just telling your story, you're also incorporating 80 years worth of stories in some cases, right? Like you're including a history of a character, but you're also mindful of the bigger picture of that character and the future of that character.
Right.
And so you're telling these things. And so when you're doing something like what we've been doing, and I've been working on events pretty much nonstop for DC for like 5 years now, right? So it's like being involved in all that stuff, you're always telling these stories that go beyond this one comic, right? And there's challenges there. There's an addiction, I think. There is like a once you get into that, sometimes it can be addicting. Like I don't know how to word it, but you're just like there is definitely an energy there that you get a hold of. Sometimes you're like, oh man, this is so much fun. Like James and I would talk about this a lot over the last couple of years of moments where when we were building out the plans for death metal, where it's like, I can't believe we're doing all this stuff. Like we get to do this. And it's like you get to do all that, and then every once in a while, like it's so rare when you're just like, I'm just gonna tell this quiet story.
Right.
And that was the thing about doing Silver Coin and some of the other creator own stuff I'm doing, where you get to kind of like erase all of that from your brain for a moment and just focus on this one thing. It's not always smaller. Like, I mean, definitely Silver Coin is smaller, and that all takes place in an arcade in the mall. But even with some of the stuff I'm doing that's like either horror stuff or sci-fi creator owned, I get to tell a much more contained story.
Yes.
Different pieces, and it's just me. There's something really beautiful about obviously creating comics, right? But when you and your collaborators get to just make this world together, it's like you and the artist, like you just get to kind of like, obviously it's like making a band and you're just gonna make these songs together. Bendis always says the thing about creator owned comics you have to keep in mind is that it's like making a baby with somebody. Like it's a relationship. Like if you're really gonna do it, and like Mike Henderson and I, who made Nailbiter, like that has united us forever, right? Like we will, we're friends, but it's like we have this baby together that every decision about that baby, we have to talk about that baby,
Right.
But there is something really beautiful, and I think that's why creator owned comics, going way back to what you said in the beginning about why sometimes creators, when they have to choose, like of course they're going to choose their baby.
Of course.
I have this. Are you a basketball fan?
I am not really a sports guy, but if you
But you
reference
understand
teams
that
from
there
30
is
years
a
ago,
thing
yes.
called basketball, and that people
Yeah.
dribble a ball and they shoot it. All
And
right.
two people play. Yeah.
I have this thing I tell people about. I was talking about this with Tom King a few weeks ago because I don't think it's a secret, but he has creator own books he's working on. I think
Yes.
they like kind of teased one recently, right?
Yep.
So we were talking about creator own versus work for hire and Marvel and DC stuff, and I was like, all right, here's what the differences are. If I am, or you, okay, so you are a basketball scout. You were a scout for a professional basketball team, and I come to you and I say to you, I have this kid. He's 18 or he's a freshman in college. He's great. Like all the fundamentals are there. He knows how to play basketball. Like he is a good basketball player. All the stuff is there. He knows what's up. He's gone through training. Again, the core, the fundamentals, all those pieces are there. They just need to have more experience and they need to be put into a team, right? And then they get brought into the culture of what it's like playing professionally, right?
Okay.
You might need to say, okay, well, they need more time in college. They need more time on the bench. They need to do there are certain things we can do to get them there. But I think I can do that. Like you're probably thinking like, okay, the chances of me making that person a professional basketball player, I can do that. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't work every time, but I think I can do it, right? That's what it's like working for Marvel and DC. Like you get these books, these characters, and these characters already have the fundamentals there to be successful. A lot of the pieces are already in place. There's a lot of things that you can and can't do. Some already made that character's origin a lot of times, right? Like there's pieces there, and even if you're going to make a change that origin, the pieces are there,
Yeah.
right? Like the pieces are there.
The shorthand is already in place. Yeah.
Right. Now imagine you are still an NBA scout, and you're going to find a new player for your team, and I come to you with a baby, like a little baby, and I say, I need to turn this baby into an NBA player. Here you go. All right, bye. Like, that's the difference between work for hire and creator own. Like, when you look at that, to make that baby a successful comic book, it's a lot more work.
Yes.
But I think you have an ownership of it that's different, not just in terms of an ownership. Like, that baby doesn't have multiple parents. Like, when a person gets to the NBA, they probably had multiple coaches, multiple support staff, multiple people in their lives that have got them there. It wasn't one person. I mean, in some cases it kind of is, but it isn't. It's always there is a structure there that gets them there, right?
Exactly.
Whereas in the creator-owned comics, when you're starting with baby, that baby has nothing. No one knows what it is. They have no brand recognition. It's just you and the other people who are basically making that baby, and so you have you have an ownership of that baby. You have much more of an emotional investment in that baby. But the challenges of getting it to there are also greater. So if you do get there with that baby, if you make it and you make that baby an NBA player and you do it, boy, that is your baby. You will hold on to it tight, right? So that's where some of the differences are, because when it gets to that, you understand that like you're part of a process at that point, right? Like you are holding the baton to help that kid get where they got to go when they've already been running, right? That system's already running. Those are the differences to me, and part of where like emotional attachment and why people get defensive, or where creators, if they could choose, they would choose. Like, of course you pick your baby, right?
Yeah.
So it's like all that stuff, and don't get me wrong, like I love DC Comics, and I love those characters a lot, and I probably think about them way too much at this point. But I definitely, my head will always be with creator owned too. Like I'm always gonna have that piece. Like those are my kids, So it's such an interesting it's an interesting thing. But that goes back around why people are like, if I had to choose and I had the option, what would I do? Right.
Right.
It always comes back around to that. But
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see what's next. Yeah, I know, comics, baby. Yeah, it's I'm excited to see the next creator-owned thing coming from you. Can't wait for Batman, Justice League Incarnate, Robin still going strong. Response has been fantastic.
I'm glad people dig it.
Yeah,
Robin is the easiest thing I work on. Well, all of it's been pretty good. Robin is the one that is the easiest. Like that's the one that I think it's because Damian. I just have Damian in my head, so it's like he's just the clearest voice in my head when it comes to a lot of characters.
Yeah,
him and Batman are probably the clearest.
What's
voice
your
right
voice
now.
for Batman? What's your
Michael Keaton?
Okay, is it Michael Keaton? Because like, there's a
Yeah,
lot
Michael
of
Keaton.
I know everybody has like their own kind of voice for Batman. Their kind of like approach to him. You know, some folk are like,
Well, I
he's a
mean, like
loner, he's
when
a
it when
team
it comes to
player.
comics, I look at a lot of there's the obvious stuff of like Long Halloween and Year One and Dark Knight, but I look at a lot of like look at Matt Wagner stuff, like Matt Wagner Faces. I look
Yeah,
at things like that, and I go back and I can I do look at a lot of the '90s Batman stuff, and it's obviously that's where a lot of my like Batman stuff comes from is that era. But when it comes to Batman, I've always been really interested in something that Michael Keaton said, where he would get the script. I think it was for Batman Returns, and he would cross out Batman lines because he was like, Batman wouldn't talk this much. Bruce might, and he might if he was talking to somebody he knows, like Alfred, but not
not to a
all the
criminal or
time.
yeah,
And so yeah, I didn't. So I kept that in mind a lot when I think about that stuff. And I was a kid, like Kevin Conroy had that voice too. Like
yeah,
it's quieter. Like Batman is quieter. We have this huge thing of Batman trades here, and it's like
yeah.
I know what James, but also I had to separate myself because like James has his voice, Scott had his, Tom had his. I had to find a way, and I really kind of came around to less was more.
Gotcha.
Was really my attitude about it of like less was more with my Batman. So he doesn't really talk a lot.
Right.
That's it. So it's a lot more grim, like grim looks and staring you down and being
Yeah.
intimidating by being present. It's like those are the things I wanted my Batman to do was talk less and be scary by just being a presence in the room.
Yeah.
Like that was all sort of what my goal was for him.
I can dig it. Well, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show,
Yeah,
man. Can't wait to see
always
more.
fun.
Same
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Always a pleasure. And we'll see you guys next time with another episode. Of course, Josh, man, I know you're so busy, but you should have your own podcast, dude. It's just, you're a font of information and a joy to have on, but there's no way there's any
Someday.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, someday.
But we'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot
Thanks
for
again.
watching.